The elevator pitch is basically something, the simplest way is the duration in which you're in the elevator with someone, but 60 seconds seems reasonable. Big top item stuff, not a lot of details, and you need a catchy, something catchy about it so that when the person leaves the elevator, they think about your project.
Absolutely, I agree. It definitely the duration of the elevator, but also I think in that instance giving quick comps would be helpful. Like it's paranormal activity meets Disneyland, and then people get an idea. That was a terrible comp, by the way.
Let's talk about comps for a second.
Can I say one more thing on the elevator pitch? Having sometimes bumped into people that I ended up working with. The elevator pitch is not to try to sell them the whole idea or pitch all of the plot. It's a seed for a subsequent meeting or submission. So that's the key thing, is that you don't want to overdo it. It's really that hook. And then the response should be, that sounds really cool. Send that to me, or let's follow up on that.
You've got 15 minutes in a room. Just know your material. Just be really clear on what you want to talk about. If you've got 20 seconds in a lift with somebody, don't fumble it. Practice is the most important part of your pitch. Rehearsal. Know your material. So if you've got 20 seconds or if you've got 15 minutes, you've got to know your material. Comps are always important, but just be really clear on the story you want to tell. Try and find something that is totally original about one or two of the characters, so that it sounds interesting. To your point, if you're in an elevator for 15 seconds, it's about the next conversation. You're not going to pitch them the whole thing. You just want to hook them. It's like you go fishing. You've got the fish on the hook. Now you've got to reel them in, right? It's easy to get them on the hook. Pulling the fish in is really hard. Depends on what you're fishing for. But the point is, you just have to know your material and be really clear about the story you want to tell.
Agreed, and I think in a room especially, it has to be a really premeditated choreography. And you've got 15 minutes to get your basic idea through, not even basic, your idea through that will get you sold. It is choreographed. Like when I prepare my clients to go in a room, I have a place for the star to talk. I make sure that it's an engaging play that they invite people to join. And know your material is really important. Okay, so I prepare my clients to be in a room. So the room is warm when they get there. They have a basic idea. If Camille did an elevator pitch and the follow-up was a meeting, and they like the idea, I would prepare them. They have a general idea of what it was, who's attached, who we're bringing in the room. And then when we get in the room, it is choreography. It's from we all do the pleasantries when we get in the room, and then it's literally now let's begin. And you start telling your story, and you make sure that your star attached has something to say. Everyone who's in the room adds to the story, and knowing your material is really important. I personally, because of the way I set up my pitches, haven't been in a room where I've lost people. I try to stay away from that. And especially if the room that I set up is to hear a particular idea. If it's bombing, it's just bombing. They're going to have a ton of questions, right? If I'm lucky, if it's bombing. But if they'll have questions, we'll sort of course correct through the questions.
I was going to say, if you're in a meeting, if you're in a meeting to pitch something, you're there for a specific reason.
Yes.
Right? If it's just not hitting the mark, don't pivot to something else. It looks like you don't really care about the thing you're there to talk about in the first place. If it's set up as a general meeting and you're just talking and you're, I'm thinking about this idea or that idea, you can put 2 or 3 ideas out there. You don't have to have it all worked out. It's just a longer version of an elevator pitch. But if you're in a meeting and it's about a specific thing and it's not working, it's not working. There's a reason why. Either you haven't rehearsed it well enough, or it's not thought out enough, or you just haven't done your homework, or you are just totally misreading the room, and maybe you're meeting with the wrong executive for that idea. Either way, it's just not working. Don't pivot to something else. It looks like you just don't care about the thing you're there to talk about, and you're just going to throw it against the wall to see what sticks.
And I'd like to add something to that, which could be that what you're pitching is just not right for the mandates that that company has. But you never know, at some point, someone in the room could end up coming back. They may be at a different studio or network. So you do want to push through and finish that presentation. Because sometimes they may not be connected, not because you're bombing, but just because they're just like, we know we have a project like this, or this just isn't right for us. So you still want to complete that performance. And the last thing I want to say, not all of us are great actors. David used the word choreography, and I like to use the word performance. So when I pitch, I have what I call a pitch script. And myself and those I'm pitching with, we are actors doing a performance. We have our roles, we have our script, we rehearse, we do table read or whatever you want to call it, but we go through several months, could be 6 months preparing a pitch.
I'll just add this really quickly. Nobody should technically bomb if you practice. So this idea that you're going to bomb, you've created that situation due to lack of preparation. We may not like it, it may not be for the people that you're pitching it to, but you should never be bombing it if you practice it, and then practice it in front of your friends and let them ask you questions and role play it out. Because the idea of bombing is just an indication of lack of preparation, and if you practice, again, you'll make a good personal impression. It may not be the right project for the people, but it's a good indication as to how serious you are by putting into the time of practicing. That's a very good point.
Need a little bit more backstory to get into the characters. But it also depends on who it is and what's going on, right? Yeah, it's reading the room, but especially who you have in the room, I think, I wouldn't drone on with the pitch for 20 minutes for Alan Horn. If you know what I mean, I wouldn't do that. But succinct to the point, especially if I have the person in the room that can buy it. I agree with you. It's really project specific because, like you said, rom-com, if you don't get guy loses girl, guy gets girl, there's no leave behind. But yeah, if you're trying to pitch the Matrix, you need to create that world and leave that leave behind.
The difference between, I like to call them presentation slides and then a pitch deck. So presentation slides is because of the new normal after the pandemic or during when we were pitching on Zoom. So having visuals with your pitch while you're in that little box can be helpful because you can use it as a visual aid while you're pitching. But the most important thing about a pitch, I feel, or one of the most important things, is the human connection. So you don't want the visuals, like if you're pitching in person, a presentation isn't going to mean as much as if I'm pitching a rom-com and you are laughing your ass off. You're going to start laughing like, I see this movie. But the visuals are not going to do that. If you're looking at me in the eye and that's like, this great part happens, it's going to be what's going to get you into it.
You just have to make sure the visuals don't distract from your pitch. Yeah. Right? You don't want to have something on a screen, and if you're trying to talk to somebody, if you're looking at them and they're looking at you, and all of a sudden they're looking away, then you've lost them for a moment. Just for a second, but you've lost them. And trust me, the second that you lose them, they're thinking about where they're going for lunch. Part of the pitch also, I find, is you got to pick the right time, right? If I have a client going in for a pitch, I will try and orchestrate the time they're going to be pitching. If they're pitching at 12 o'clock, forget about it. They're thinking, I have to get to my lunch at 1 o'clock, and I want out of here in half an hour. You've got to give them time to ask questions. Hopefully they're engaged enough for questions. If it's after lunch, you want to get them the minute they come back, which is always a challenge because they've got a meeting to go into. You've got to time it right. It's not a science, but if you're trying to sell something, you have to look at it like it's science. There is a way to do it, and you're trying to orchestrate something, you're trying to manufacture something, you have to succeed. And all of these things, as preposterous as they may sound, and they do to me, I'm saying them, it just matters to me. I'm always trying to get the right time.
I was just gonna say, also it's good to know the room. Like, you know, I'm not gonna pitch an extreme action movie to Karen Rosenfeld, right? Like, you know the executive that you're going to, and you pander to their taste, or the studio's mandates, like you mentioned, Camille.
I'll say this because I was pitching as early as like 10 years ago. So you want the advantage of being in person whenever you can to read the body language easier so that the person you're pitching to is not distracted by your cat in the background on Zoom or the bad connection and that's audio getting cut. And the first 4 minutes you're on mute and you're talking and we're trying to get your attention that we can't hear you. So you eliminate all those distractions that Zoom brings to the table that you don't have in person. So I highly recommend it in person whenever possible.
And I do too, but I will say I sold several pitches during the pandemic, after the pandemic, on Zoom. It's almost like if I'm giving you my teaser, I go and I pull pictures from comparables and different sites that have movie and TV stills, and I'll give you, like, if there's a kick-ass picture of a woman, like, kicking a dog or something like that, and I got it from a Charlize Theron movie or Angela Bassett movie. My character's doing that, but I'll have the visual aid up while I'm saying, and then she sees this man, she kicks his ass, you know, and then I have that picture up. So it's helping me to tell the story, and I actually use them while I'm pitching. And then I come out of the visual aid at the end of the pitch for questions or anything like that. I don't have text on those slides. It may just say something like teaser, just as the headline, because I don't want them reading the text. But I do have the picture that evokes a feeling while I'm pitching that scene or that moment or that character, if that makes sense.
I would also add, I think pitching is the single hardest thing a writer can do. It really is. It is so hard to condense 120 pages that you've got in your head into 15 or 20 minutes. It's really, really hard. So you do have to practice. You've got to figure out how do you make sure the audience that you're pitching to gets what you get, right? This is something that you're passionate to tell this story. You are passionate to bring these characters to life. How do you relay that to somebody? How do you hope that they get the same passion that you have? It's really, really hard. And sometimes, and I represent writers like this, they are terrible in the room, but they're great on the page. It's just a fact of life. Not everybody can do it. I've sat in the room with writers who are brilliant in the room, and they are awful on the page. And it's just a fact of life. That's just the way it is. Don't get discouraged, right, at the word no. You have to push through the no. Right? But you just have to figure out how to do it. If you truly love it and you're hearing no 3 or 4 or 5 times, there's a reason why. You have to listen to what the marketplace is telling you. Right? We all want to make films. We all want to make television. We all get paid when you get paid. So we're invested in it as well. So if we're giving you wisdom or advice, or we're telling you it's just not working, if you want to ignore the advice and go write it on spec, go do that too. But don't get discouraged if somebody says no. You have to push through the no.
And in person, when I was talking about the slides, I would not use those slides if I was pitching in person. In person, I really want to have a one-to-one connection with the person I'm pitching with. So it's going to all be about my performance, quote unquote, in pitching.
And pitch character. Character all the time. It's interesting if the characters are interesting. you can come up with I mean, for the most part, there's, you know, there was a director, no longer with us, named Sidney Pollack, who was a brilliant filmmaker. And he basically said there's 5 or 6 plots. They're all the same. But it's the characters within those stories that make those films interesting, right? It's always going to be about the character. You have to make that character or characters stand out in a way that the person you're pitching to is going to lean in. They lean in, you know, that fish is on the hook, right? You've got to pitch character.
You know, if it's compelling, like what Squid Game became and what Parasite became, you know, if you want to keep it, and I guess what I'm saying is, if the project needs to be updated, be contemporary, and that's what you want, absolutely. But I think there's a more of an appetite for diverse voices, characters in Hollywood now. Would you agree?
I mean, I would, if the diversity is pertinent to the story, just make sure it comes across clearly to us. That's really the best way, just to make sure we understand your connection to the characters and whatever the diverse aspect of it is. We're not guessing, you're clearly explaining it to us.
You understand your connection, but also that the humanity of the characters and the big ideas and the themes that you're exploring are universal, because at the end of the day, it's the human experience. There are scripts that I've written, 10, 15 years ago that sometimes I had to put down for a moment. Maybe it wasn't the right story for the marketplace. But if I pick it back up, then obviously it has to be rewritten. But I really have to also search within, what am I trying to say with this story too? And then it's not just, I want to populate it with certain characters for X, Y, Z reason, finding these different reasons, as opposed to it coming from within out, which is, let's say for me, I'm from Compton, and I started tapping into stories about people from Compton, and I didn't used to write those types of stories. So it's wow, this character, what they were going through, and this idea that I'm trying to explore about identity or justice or whatever, I'm really passionate about it within. So how can I update the story or make sure that the story is speaking to that? And not just that I'm I need to put a Latinx character, I need to put, this, I need to put African American, I need to put another able character. So there's not I'm checking boxes, but that I have a true passion about why I'm telling that story. As Ali said, a personal connection. And then there's a universal aspect to the story. The personal connection to your material, and sometimes it's hard to find because you're doing a comic book adaptation, and now you're doing a rom-com, and now you're doing sci-fi. But the personal connection to each one of those projects is so important. So you're not going into a pitch meeting and being hey, I'm pitching myself Camile the writer. You're pitching the project, but just understand that you are also pitching yourself. And I always start my pitches with my personal connection to the material. Always.
I will just add really quickly, in the indie world, the producers are dealing with you specifically a lot more than maybe a studio would, but it would be a group of people involved in the process. So for me, the individual matters big time. Because I'm going to have to be interacting with them in pre-production, production, post-production, marketability, all the festival duration. So the personality and the energy of the individual and how affable they are and easygoing they are and positive, we definitely take that into consideration when we decide to work with someone on the indie level, sometimes as much as the creative.
You also have to know the room you're walking into. So if you've got a representative who's put you in a room for whatever reason, ask that person, ask your representative, who's the person I'm meeting with? What have they done before? What movies do they like? Are they married? Do they have kids? Are they traveled? Are they from the US? Are they from somewhere else? I mean, know a little bit or a lot about the room you're walking into. It's hugely important. If you walk in cold and know nothing about that person, you're not helping yourself. You're doing yourself a disservice. You have to know the room you're walking into, right? And if you've got 3 minutes, think of the 3 things that you really want to get across that are going to make the story that much more interesting. And just be really clear on practice, obviously, but just know what you want to say. If you've got 3 minutes, it's like being on trial and you're defending someone and you've got 3 minutes to talk to the jury. How are you going to save that person's life? Same thing, right? How do you get your point across in a finite amount of time before somebody hits the bell? And it's up to you how you want to do it. And there's no science to that, but you just have to think of, how do I get it done in 3 minutes? And it may work, it may not work. Sometimes you learn a lot in failure on pitching. You really do. You learn a lot about yourself and how you tell a story. But you've got 3 minutes, you just have to think of what's going to be the most interesting part of my story in 3 minutes.
Say the 2 biggest mistakes that people make in pitches is, one, they give you the teaser pitch, so they'll do the beginning, middle, and then they say, well, you have to read this full script to get the ending. No, you gotta give us the whole thing, right? So beginning, middle, and end. A lot of people pull the ending, and it's not enticing me, it's annoying me, so don't do that. No, I'm not gonna read the whole script, I promise you, so I wanna get the whole story here. This is, in my experience, is the most common mistake. And then the second mistake that happens is a lot of character names are given. So you hear a dozen names in a 3-minute pitch that all represent certain things, and I only am retaining the last name that I heard, right? Because I just heard a bunch of other pitches with a bunch of other names of characters. So it's hard to retain it. So if you have a big cast and an extensive universe, just come down to the key things and don't get stuck in the details of every single character. People tend to, for whatever reason, want us to know the names of everybody in the film.